welcome to the 7th meeting of 2009 of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee. Can I remind everyone to switch off their mobile phones as they may affect the broadcasting system? First, I need to mention that Claudia Beamish has sent her apologies for today. And our agenda item 1 is to consider whether to take item 4 in private. Does everyone agree?
I agree.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is to take evidence from Sue Petch. Good morning, Ms Petch, from the Drinking Water Quality Regulator for Scotland on the issues arising from petition PE 1646 on drinking water supplies in Scotland. I'd like to welcome Sue Petch to the committee, and I'll start by asking you a very broad general question about what the role of the Drinking Water Quality Regulator is, and how you fit in the governance arrangements surrounding Scottish water.
Okay, essentially my role is to scrutinise Scottish water in regard to their drinking water quality duties. So that is both complying with drinking water quality standards as well as other duties that they have. They're required to treat water, they're required to disinfect water. So we look at all of those activities. So that's, I suppose, the main part of the role. We also have another function which concerns local authorities. So we also have to supervise local authorities in respect of their drinking water quality duties. And that's predominantly associated with private water supplies that they regulate. So in terms of how we fit in with the Scottish water, obviously you're aware there's quite a number of regulators for Scottish water. So SEPA regulate them in respect to wastewater discharges. We are very much entirely focused on drinking water quality, either leaving treatment works at customers' taps, so throughout the whole supply chain. There's an economic regulator who scrutinises them in terms of their price review, representation, are they taking customers' views into account? There's also the Consumer Advice, Consumer Futures Unit, who represent consumer views. So it's quite a kind of broad range of supervision. So that's my particular part of it, is the drinking water quality. In terms of what we actually do, we review all of Scottish Water's regulatory sample data, look to whether improvement is needed, advise Scottish Water we consider improvements needed. If necessary, I can take further action. I've got quite a wide range of enforcement powers. We also audit what Scottish Water do, so we visit their assets and do what we call a technical audit of treatment works. We would also look at some of their activities, such as repairing mains, and do spot audits, particularly around the hygiene of that activity. We audit the laboratory, so it's quite a broad range of audit tasks. And we also investigate what we call the water quality incidents. So Scottish Water are required to tell us and other agencies like local authorities and health boards of anything that's any sample failure or anything that's happened at a treatment works where a process might have failed. And we receive about 800 of those notifications a year, and typically around 30 we would class as more significant and require a detailed investigation. We go through our assessment of that, and we then issue our findings to the Chief Executive of Scottish Water. We might make recommendations and observations on what we found in terms of how well Scottish Water responded to a particular problem, what improvements they're going to put in place following that. So that's quite a long answer to a fairly straightforward question.
No, that's fine. That's very comprehensive. That's what we definitely need. Stuart Stevenson has a quick question on something that you said.
I just wanted to be clear if something is in there, probably in private water, bottled water plants, of which we've quite a few. Are you responsible in any way for them?
No, I'm not.
So who is?
Food Standards Scotland, and then I would imagine local authorities have some
right.
role.
Okay,
so it's treated under food legislation.
That's fine, thank you.
Before I pass on to my colleagues, you mentioned enforcement.
Yes.
What enforcement powers do you have if something hasn't been rectified?
I have an enforcement policy, so we would generally try to work very collaboratively. Mm-hmm. So we'd start off with recommending that improvements are needed. If that's not happening, or particularly if something's not included in Scottish Water's current investment programme, so their investment programme, which is set for 2015 to 2021, and they have within that something that's referred to as a technical expression. And that's a very detailed schedule of all of the activities that they need to undertake for drinking water quality or environmental improvements, and also sort of resilience activities. And that's the commitment they've made to the Scottish Government in the price review over what they'll deliver against government objectives. So if an activity is listed in there, I'd be unlikely to move to enforcement action unless I was not happy with the pace. So then my enforcement powers, I basically can take enforcement action for any act where I feel there's a significant risk to health, or a drinking water standard needs to be improved, or that is a persistent failure that's been occurring. I've also got an emergency power, which, if you like, is almost like an emergency notice to stop a certain activity, and that's never been used. And I couldn't really imagine a scenario where we would be forced to take that sort of action.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll pass on to my colleague John Scott.
Thank you, Convener. Your budget, the DWQR budget for the next year, has gone up by over 70%. Can you tell us what this increase in your budget is for and what it will deliver in terms of additionality?
Yeah, my budget is, if you like, is split into two parts. So Scottish Government recover from Scottish Water quite a considerable cost in terms of delivery of the regulator's functions. I think it's fair to put that into context of a percentage, as it's increased from £270,000 to 450. Some of that has been associated with the change to the total operating cost regime. I've also, within Scottish Government, I have 2 members of staff that look at policy. And we're seeing, if you like, a rising need in terms of policy activity. The European Commission are currently considering a revised drinking water directive that's creating quite a workload. So I increased the number of staff I had specifically to deal both with that and also with a new duty that's been placed on us, which is to do with the security of network and information systems. That's specifically for Scottish Water, that's in terms of cyber activity, and the security of water supplies from the point of view of operating technology and information technology.
Thank you. Self-evidently, what you do is science-based, but is this delivered in-house, or although perhaps from what you've just said it's not, or through contractors? And also, given what you've just said, do you see the new water quality regulations being affected by Brexit? Where will you sit in all of that? Do you know yet?
In terms of kind of our science basis, we don't have a specific research budget ourselves. We rely very heavily on World Health Organization guidelines and their documentation, and that's viewed as the authoritative text in terms of drinking water quality safety. So that's, if you like, our go-to place for information. We also are a member of the International Water Association and have access to research papers that they produce. We are also part of the Scottish Government Centre for Research Excellence in Water. They have a theme for drinking water quality. I sit on the steering group for that, so we can call on that delivery route, if you like, to have specific pieces of work done. And I can also recommend through Scottish Government's Contract Research Fund any specific pieces of work that need to be done. And there's also the strategic sort of research programme of work that goes on as well. We work quite closely with our counterparts in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also Republic of Ireland. So we meet annually to talk about the research programme. So we're quite well aware of the research programme that DEFRA have ongoing. The other source that we'd look at would be we contribute and pay for an advisory service that comes from the Water Research Centre, and that produces lots and lots of data sheets on a whole range of chemicals and microbiological substances that we can look at in terms of likely presence in water, sort of safety, what impact treatment has. So if you like, that's our kind of source of information. In terms of standards, the standards that we have are all derived from the Drinking Water Directive, which has been in place since 1998. most of those standards are ultimately derived from the World Health Organization guideline values. And that directive is transposed into Scots law, so those are the standards that we've got. So the exit from Europe won't make any impact on those standards.
Fine, thank you. And can I just ask you, what are the most recent statistics on the quality of drinking water in Scotland, and what are the underlying trends in terms of the overall quality? Is it improving or?
Yeah, I mean, the overall quality we report is for results as measured at the customer's tap, and that's just recorded as a percentage. So for 2017, it was 99.91. For 2018, we've still to receive the final data for that. Probably going to be slightly worse. The main trends I would pull out would be trihalomethanes, which is a disinfection byproduct. That's been a focus of Scottish Water's investment programme and our attention for some time. That has been improving, but seems to have plateaued for the last couple of years. Iron and manganese are areas, so these are either iron that comes from water mains, and manganese can come from source waters. That's an area of activity that needs more treatment at source. Mains cleaning, mains flushing needs to happen. Microbiological quality, I think, was something I called out certainly in my report for 2017. Water treatment works, service reservoirs particularly. I highlighted some concerns over the maintenance of service reservoirs, and Scottish Water have responded to that concern by increasing the level of investment that they're carrying out on service reservoirs in terms of repairs.
I'm being parochial for a moment. In my constituency, there's been quite a bit of water discoloration, possibly due to the extraordinary climatic conditions last year in the spring and then the summer. Have you any comments to make on that continuing discoloration in water?
It's something that we're investigating. We've been aware of it. Obviously, Scottish Water have had to report that to us, and that is being classed as a significant water quality incident. I understand from one of my inspectors that assessment is almost complete, and we'll be finalising our report to Scottish Water on that. What I understand has been there's been a number of factors that have resulted in that happening. One of which was that they introduced chloramination from the treatment works at Braddon, and that has changed the water chemistry. Right. That coincided with very high water flows and high demand through the summer period, and that seems to have caused a dislodging of main sediment throughout the network. Now, Scottish Water responded to that with flushing. I'm advised that in the immediate instant didn't really have an impact, so they had to take some specialist advice from Sheffield University, who are one of the leading experts in water mains, and they've now come up with a programme of work of low velocity flushing, yes, turbidity monitoring. What I have asked them for is an actual programme of work, because obviously the high water temperatures and flows, we're not now seeing that. When I reviewed the complaint data, complaints have lessened, but they're not back at the sort of typical historic levels for that supply area. So I'm still waiting to see the programme activities, which includes a timeline, and then I'll take a view on whether that is reasonable and whether those activities are going to deliver the improvement.
On a entirely personal point of view, I'd be very grateful if you could provide us with your view on that information when you receive it, maybe through the committee or to me personally, John Scott, yes, as the MSP for here. And finally, I want to ask you, can you explain how your processes take into account concerns about taste, odour, alongside water quality? Because water can be safe, but it can obviously have smells and things.
Yeah, I mean, taste and odour is included in the standards that we have in Scotland, but it's classed as an indicator, and the measure there is whether customers find it acceptable or not. Has it changed and has it become unacceptable? And what we'd expect Scottish Water to do in that instance is to investigate, to find out why has that water, the taste of that water changed, why is there an odour where perhaps there wasn't one before. And the first instance and first concern is that because there is a risk to health, is there something in the water that's going to cause a risk to health? If there isn't something there that's going to cause a risk to health, then we would look at what is creating that taste. So certainly in the summer, we had reported to us some problems which were to do with algal growth and algal blooms that were giving an earthy taste to the water that caused widespread complaint. So that's something that I've asked Scottish Water to carry out some feasibility study into in terms of what they can do to prevent that happening. And it's certainly, you know, when it went for something particularly widespread, I would consider taking action.
Thanks so much.
You got a short question? Yes?
A very short one. Can you just explain how the public and customers interact with you and your functions? What are the kind of public engagement structures that you work with?
I think it's probably fair to say on a day-to-day basis that we wouldn't normally engage with customers. We're a very, very small team. So our engagement tends to be following a water quality incident. We may very well seek their views on how Scottish Water investigated or responded or acted to that problem. In terms of complaints, we review complaint data from Scottish Water, and we also act as a second tier in terms of if someone's not happy with how Scottish Water have responded, then we would investigate for that particular individual. We have a website, and we try and include on their information about water quality, so FAQs, that type of thing. But that's probably the extent of that level of engagement, if you like.
No questions from Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you very much. Clearly, part of what Scottish Water are doing is cleaning and disinfecting the water before it reaches the tap where you're measuring it. What input do you have into the methods that they use for that disinfection, if any?
In terms of what they're required to do, our legislation requires them to disinfect the water, and then they are also required to use only approved products and processes. So there is an approvals process, so they can't just select any particular pipe or filter. It's got to have come through an approvals process, and my colleagues at DWI run the UK approvals process. The chemicals that they use, we tend to refer to, they're called traditional chemicals, and they have to have it.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The chemicals within the approvals process are referred to in that as traditional chemicals.
Traditional, yes.
So they're required to have a BSEN standard that sets out the level of purity that the chemical has to have. In terms of the decision and choice that Scottish Water make, my view will be over whether it's delivering the required outcome. And that would be what I would be looking for. If I think that the choice of process is not going to deliver the outcome, then I will voice that and perhaps take some stronger action. But the choice of how they disinfect and how they treat water lies with Scottish Water.
In your earlier answer, one of the things you focused on was iron as a contaminant, and you identify water mains. Now, clearly there are two types of water mains, one that takes the water to the processing plant, and then mains that take it from there to the customer. I can see how the plant can deal with the water that arrives in eliminating iron. How does Scottish Water protect contamination by iron and indeed other contaminants in the part of the distribution network from the processing plant to the customer's tap? How do they do that, and what's your role in that?
In terms of protecting the water as it leaves the plant, so they will use iron coagulants or an aluminium coagulant to treat the water. So they've got to have the levels of iron, manganese, aluminium as low as possible leaving the treatment plant. So then it enters into the distribution system, and they have a mix of materials. Because some of these pipes are very old, some of them are 100 years old, so they might have unlined iron pipes. They might have, obviously the more recent pipes going over the last 20 or so years have been plastic PVC pipes. So one of the tactics they can use is they can renew the pipes. They use flushing a lot, so they clean the material out of the pipe. So if the pipe degrades, if the iron degrades, then that needs to be flushed out. Ultimately, if that gets the degradation gets too bad, then they will need to renew those, because they may well be getting burst mains, and that can also create water quality issues with discoloration and risk of ingress as well. One of the other ways of protecting the water as it travels from the treatment works to customers' taps is that it has a residual disinfectant. So it will have a small amount of free chlorine or monochloramine, so that water is protected as it passes through the distribution system, and make sure that there's not an increase in biological activity in that main.
So these additives that are in the water that leaves the water treatment plant are an essential part of protecting the water that comes out our tap from things that may happen in the distribution, the retail distribution
Yes.
network. So it would be impossible to put water into the system that had no protection from what might happen in the network.
Wouldn't be recommended. It's not set out in our regulations that they must have a residual disinfectant, but it's viewed as best practice, certainly for the UK.
Right, certainly in the UK. What about elsewhere? Because you made that qualification quite deliberately, so I'd be interested to know what other solutions do others adopt?
Yeah, not all countries have the residual disinfection, residual disinfectant in the water. I think in particularly Germany, they tend not to have a free chlorine residual in the water as supplied. They rely on they have much more extensive water treatment processes, so they will have more stages of treatment than Scottish Water perhaps has. I think their networks are perhaps newer as well. I know certainly some of the countries have a more rapid network mains renewal rate than Scotland and the rest of the UK have. So there are different policies in different countries.
So therefore the distance the water travels from the treatment plant to the tap is quite different in Germany by the sounds of it from what you would expect in the UK.
I don't know. I couldn't comment on the distance, but certainly they have many more stages of treatment.
So water in Germany goes through several treatment plants, is that?
Several processes, several stages.
Right. Give it up.
Thank you very much. And now to questions from Angus MacDonald.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, convener, and good morning. I'd like to turn to disinfection byproducts, which you've touched on earlier. Now, we know that in Scotland, Article 29.2 of the 2014 regulations places a requirement on Scottish Water to keep DBP levels as low as possible without compromising the effectiveness of disinfection or treatment. And we also know that WHO guidelines highlight the importance of limiting the presence of DBPs in the public water supply as much as possible, and also establishing a robust monitoring and testing regime. Now, I'd be curious to know how is a balance struck between the requirement to disinfect drinking water and the limiting of DBPs in the water.
In terms of, I suppose, the balance, I mean, the primary requirement is the treatment and disinfection for public health protection. Then to minimise disinfection byproducts, really Scottish Water have to try and minimise what we refer to as the precursors, the compounds that would react with chlorine or other disinfection products to form that byproduct. So part of the pre-treatment, if you like, so the coagulation, the filtration of that water, is to reduce those precursors as much as possible. Going further back, they can also look at source control and how they can protect sources from deterioration. They have been looking at peatland restoration in some areas to try and reduce the organic loading on that. So really it's about removing the precursors to try and minimise formation of those byproducts.
Okay, the WHO guidelines state the risks to health from these byproducts are extremely small in comparison to the risks associated with inadequate disinfection, and it's important that disinfection efficacy not be compromised in attempting to control such byproducts. So you reckon you've got the balance right?
Yes.
Okay. how would you respond to concerns that there's a number of DBPs which aren't regulated and are therefore not tested for?
We obviously have a standard for trihalomethanes, and that is generally viewed as being not an indicator, if you like. So if trihalomethanes are present, that's an indication there will be other disinfection byproducts such as haloacetic acid present as well. So that's historically how we viewed THMs and why they are so important. We always look at not just areas where standards have failed, but also, you know, is it at 90 percentile of the standard, and trying to drive that down. We've quite recently requested Scottish Water to start to monitor for other disinfection byproducts as well. So whilst they might not be regulated, I've taken the view that actually I need further evidence that supports that minimisation. So they've been asked to extend the monitoring into other disinfection byproducts. So they've been looking at haloacetic acids, NDMA, those sort of... That's been introduced fairly recently, but I do know that Scottish Water have contracted Cranfield University in 2016 to do further research for them, and that's been looking at a much broader range of disinfection byproducts so that they can build that evidence base for me that they are minimising byproducts.
Okay, and do you know when that work is likely to be completed?
All of the analysis sampling has been completed. I think it's just in the final stages of the report being confirmed and completed.
Okay, thank you.
And there's questions on the chloramination from John Scott.
Thank you very much. Thank you for reminding me, Convener. I just want to ask if any further work has been done on any possible health impacts of chloramination since the committee last heard and discussed this with Scottish Water.
Any further work?
Direct effects or exacerbation of existing health conditions which have been suggested may be caused by chloramination.
Other than the work that they've got Cranfield University doing, looking at disinfection byproducts, I'm not aware of any further work that's been done by NHS Highland or Health Protection Scotland following the work that was done, was that 2 years ago now?
Mm-hmm. The health effects on kidney dialysis and things like that. Are there any other effects that you have concerns about that chloramination causes or not?
Obviously, I'm quite aware that there are concerns over the disinfection byproducts that are related to chloramination. And always very clear with Scottish Water that they need to look at the sources and the types of water that they're going to use. There are certain risk factors that would make increased prevalence of formation of NDMAs, and those are the sorts of things that Scottish Water need to take on board when deciding whether it's appropriate technique or not.
So I suppose the bottom line is then you're content that this process is safe?
Yes, I am.
And certainly want to hear that reassurance from you. Could I move on to nitrates and nitrites? And we know that drinking water treated with monochloramine can be a source for nitrates and nitrites, which can be harmful to humans in high concentrations. Can you offer the committee reassurances in this regard that these concentrations don't ever reach dangerous levels?
Yeah, the main concern is the combination of nitrate and nitrite that can result something that's called blue baby syndrome. That's a
yes.
health concern. And within the regulations, there's a calculation of how much of either of those shouldn't be exceeded. We've not had any concerns over the combination of them or worries over that. I have had some concerns over nitrite. There have been a number of sample failures for nitrite, and have taken that up with Scottish Water in terms of the control of the process. I was quite pleased to see, certainly for 2018, that was a much improved position compared to performance in 2017. So they put in place some flushing programs and also some programs of work that actually, for a short period of time, changed the disinfection over to reduce nitrite problems forming in particular parts of the network.
Okay, thank you very much.
And now to continue the theme, Finn Carson.
Thank you. We're aware that Scottish Water is designing or currently constructing 3 improvement works which will use chloramination. How is the use of chloramination relative to other disinfecting methods, and what financial considerations or other is given with regards to existing infrastructures, water sources, or land use practicalities in the catchment area when that's considered?
In terms of its use as a disinfection process, it's not recommended as the primary disinfection process because it's not as effective as chlorine, and I wouldn't be happy if they were going to use that, and they certainly generally use it after chlorine just to give that residual. The 3 treatment processes that I'm aware of, it's all about disinfection byproducts and particularly THMs. In terms of their decision-making process, they've got to consider, essentially the whole life cost of the process. And we don't really want to stray too much into the economic regulators' territory here in terms of the financing of it, but they would genuinely look at the costs and the benefits of a particular process, and will it deliver the outcome that they're required to achieve from a drinking water quality perspective.
So, do you have any? We heard some suggestions that there was a water plant in the past that was costing too much to run, and Scottish Water decided to use dechlorination to replace the mechanical cleaning of the water, if you like. What financial consideration came into that? Is there a presumption sometimes that this method's going to cost too much, so we'll use another?
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the example that you've got, but I'm quite happy to follow up on that if you could give me some more information.
Okay, I certainly do that. With that in mind, do you anticipate there's going to be any extension of chloramination in the future, and any indication of what percentage of Scottish Water would eventually be treated in that way?
I'm aware that when I've spoken to them that they've got 3 treatment works under consideration that might have it chloramination installed. They've also got a number of other treatment works that are in feasibility study because of concerns over disinfection byproduct risks. But there are a number of options that they're considering for those, which a combination of other treatment options, so ion exchange, GAC, granular activated carbon treatment process. So those are all in the mix. So it's difficult to say how much more they might do, but they're not concentrating solely on chloramination. They will consider what all of the treatment options are and then have to do the project appraisal on that basis. And they do have 3 treatment processes for ion exchange under construction just now as well, and those are because of the need to minimise disinfection byproducts.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. And Mark Ruskell?
Thanks. I mean, I think you've already covered a little bit of information around how other countries, the Netherlands, Germany, are perhaps going in a different direction here. And you particularly mentioned about how Germany's got more of a precautionary approach to NDMAs. Why, in your view, have we not gone down that route in the UK? Is it because of the age of the infrastructure that we have? Is it because we have particular problems in relation to land use or peat soils? I mean, there seems to be quite a divergence within the European Union on this, and I'm interested to know why you think we're currently on this direction.
It's an interesting question. I'm not really sure that there's been a deliberate, if you like, kind of policy choice and divergence not to be more prescriptive. the regulations are set up in such a way that there is that duty to minimise disinfection byproducts. Admittedly, a lot of focus has been on THMs, but that duty exists, and so that I think the approach in the UK has been rather to be very prescriptive over how that's delivered, is to allow choice within quite a set context of minimisation. So I think that's perhaps the background. I don't think it's really to do with choice of infrastructure, and certainly the choice of treatment process has to be appropriate to the source and the risks that you're dealing with. So some of the English companies do have more stages of treatment because they have more issues in their source waters. They have much more prevalence of pesticides that need to be removed than we would have in Scotland. So there's the choice of process really has to be tailored to the problem. And I think potentially Germany will have had similar issues as well. They may, I can't really, I suppose I'm second guessing the problems that they have, which I shouldn't do. But you know, that choice of process has got to be designed to tailor to the source that's been treated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned earlier on about removal of precursors, and that's a particular issue in Scotland, given peaty soils and high numbers of livestock on the hill and everything else. You're a drinking water quality regulator, but do you feel the impact of the land use strategy or catchment level approaches to managing the land in a way which perhaps reduces flooding, but also reduces the kind of loss of peat soils or
Could you repeat that question for me, please?
So in terms of the land use strategy, I mean, does your work, does your influence stretch over into policies around how we actually manage catchments?
No, it doesn't. But I do work with SEPA, and certainly quite recently been discussing with SEPA their water sector plan, which is that was been out for consultation, and exploring with them issues around protection of source waters used for drinking water production. They've very much focused on Water Framework Directive, in particular looking at pollutants, but actually, you know, I'd be quite keen that organic material or metals such as manganese also form part of that. So certainly Scottish Water's strategic plan, they're highlighting the challenge that they face over the next 20-25 years with rising levels of organics in their source waters. So it is a key challenge in terms of managing the water environment.
So in your view, is there enough work going into the land management solutions to try and remove these precursors?
I think most people probably say there's always more that can be done. Right. I mean, certainly Scottish Water do have a sustainable land management team of people who work with local land agents. They do a lot of research. They work with Forestry Commission as well in terms of their activities. So that's a kind of a routine part of the business. I think I would have perhaps a word of caution that you know, land management is an essential part of the multi-barrier approach, but it's not going to deliver completely that removal of precursors. Certainly the focus needs to be on those catchments where Scottish Water are talking and highlighting deterioration. And if that work starts now, before they move into higher risk in terms of what's coming out of the treatment works, is something that I would encourage.
Right.
I'd like to move on to the petition that we mentioned, PE 1646. There's a number of questions from members around the progress that's been made in addressing the concerns raised in that petition. First from Angus MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener. You wrote to the Petitions Committee in June 2017 with detail on the work that you've carried out in relation to the Abbeymoor water treatment works. Are you able to update the committee on any further work that's been carried out since then?
We've met with Scottish Water a couple of times just to review the sampling programme that they have. We requested that was extended, I think that was last year, and that they continued with some of the additional monitoring that they were doing, reviewed how well they were controlling things like pH at the treatment works, and that's something they've been focused on improving. We've also had updates from them on the number of contacts that they've been receiving, and the data that we've received from them has shown that has decreased in terms of contacts about taste complaints. That's predominantly the main area of activity, was really just to speak to Scottish Water and find out, update what they're doing, make sure that they do have in place the right levels of monitoring, that they're still engaging with customers and still continuing with sampling when customers are concerned.
So have the pH levels improved?
The stability has improved. I mean, not that it was widely varying, but it was something that they highlighted they wanted to improve.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
John Scott.
Thank you very much. You'll be aware that the petitioner wrote with a further submission on the 8th of March 2018 stating that we have shown that between 2012 and 2017 parameters set by the EU of taste and odour, in inverted commas, acceptable to consumer and no abnormal change, close inverted commas, were not adhered to, and it took an independent survey for Scottish Water to acknowledge this. DWQR did not ensure that Scottish Water complied. How would you respond to that criticism that you didn't hold Scottish Water, not you perhaps personally, but that the DWQR didn't hold Scottish Water to account between 2012 and 2017?
In 2012, which was when the new treatment process came on, we were very much aware that there was concerns regarding the taste. So we audited the treatment process, reviewed Scottish Water sample data. We also, one of my inspectors obviously went to site, but also went to service reservoirs, looking at chlorine residuals, tasting the water. And we found, we were concerned over how Scottish Water had introduced that treatment works into supply. It gone into supply with quite a high chlorine residual that raised concerns. And we suggested that that was something that they improved for future new treatment processes that were coming online. We also thought that they could have had a much improved consumer engagement over the introduction of that process. And it was my understanding that the number of contacts had decreased. We receive summary data on the number of customer contacts from Scottish Water, and that hadn't specifically kind of stood out to us. But I think it's fair to say one of the learning points for us has been to focus more on customer contact data regarding taste. We tend to do quite a detailed analysis on discoloration and look at pockets of concerns over discoloration. So that was a learning point that we took from that was to look in more detail at that level of contacts in specific areas.
Specifically in my area of Ayrshire, where there was quite a fuss about the introduction of chloramination, and my colleague Mark Russell will also deal with this, but do you think there are lessons to be learned by Scottish Water in this regard in terms of perhaps better informing their customers about how they are proceeding?
Yes,
certainly
I think
in my part of Ayrshire.
I think so. When I looked at the information that had been provided, I thought that could have been clearer as to the reason why for the introduction of chloramination. I think also that was done quite quickly. So obviously Scottish Water had known they intended to chloraminate for quite some time, but that communication with customers, I think probably for the reasons that need people, particularly this issue with people needing to change the treatment chemical they use if they keep fish to be quite close to the time. But I don't think they'd engage particularly with, for example, community councils. There's perhaps, I think there are some learning points for them in how they do that in advance of a change.
And so will you be instituting, or will you be putting in place a request for them to change their practice in that regard?
They've already committed to do that. So I had a follow-up meeting with the Chief Executive and Director of Corporate Affairs and Communication, and they talked to me about what changes they were going to put in place when they were next making a change, which would be more engagement at community council level. They also involved CAS in that discussion as well, to get views from CAS over how they could improve the communication. So I'm content that they've taken that on board and I've learned from it.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have any other issues you want to? Finn Carson.
I just wanted to go back to the question I asked earlier. I was confusing two different topics, and it was actually a wastewater plant I was thinking about, so it had nothing to do with drinking water quality, so we'll not need to look into that any further.
Before we round off, I'm just, with regards to this petition, are you content that everything has been done to satisfy the complaints of the petitioners in regard to Strathpay and Badenoch area, and the Aviemore area, with regard to their water quality?
Yes. I suppose my concern is that the regulations as we currently have them don't seem to provide that level of reassurance. So in terms of Badenoch and Strathpay, what Scottish Water have been doing, what NHS Highland have done in terms of reviewing that, I'm not really sure what further steps could be taken. But there is that kind of question in my mind, if you like, that the regulations that we have not given that reassurance, and whether that's something that we need to consider in the longer term, whether we expand a little bit on this minimisation of disinfection byproducts, whether we would choose to bring in some different additional standards to THMs, since there is now, almost 30% of the population receive chloraminated water. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time this morning. We're going to suspend the meeting briefly to allow Ms. Petch to leave. Thank you very much for your time.